Good evening. I'm Newell Williams, president of Bright Divinity School at Texas Christian University, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the sanctuary of my home church on this most extraordinary night in Fort Worth, Texas. We had planned, of course, to be at Ed Landreth, but when the university closed for good reasons, University Christian Church quickly agreed to host us, and we should all say thank you, University Christian Church. Delighted that you are here, and to introduce our speaker is Professor James O. Duke, Professor of History of Christianity and History of Christian Thought in Bright Divinity School.
Good evening on this chilly time. It is my special pleasure to introduce to you our speaker this evening. My own introduction to his work is very recent, but altogether welcome to that. Many of you here, perhaps everybody, know more and better than I do, and sometime before, of his book, The Shack, Where Tragedy Confronts Eternity. The story grows around the story that is told in the book itself, much as stories have grown around the origins of the Apostles' Creed. The story grows of how it was conceived in humble circumstances, born without thought of publishers and without their interest. And although at first unheralded, has soared since to stunning global sales success. The Shack's author hails from Canada. He lived as a MK, a missionary's kid, in West Papua, colonial-era New Guinea, and as a PK in the Pacific Northwest. He gained a degree in religion with highest honors from Warner Pacific College in Portland, Oregon, and he went to a seminary, the name of which I do not know. If it had been Bright, I think I might have remembered it. He and his wife, Kim, live in Oregon, have 6 children, and a much-cherished extended family and circle of friends. I leave it to our speaker to add to or to correct these factoids if he chooses to. The book itself, though, provokes me to some further word. What is a historian of Christianity and the history of Christian thought to say of this book, especially after undertaking extensive worldwide web research such as I have? I'm going to limit myself, you'll be pleased to know, to a very few notes. The Shack is, I submit to you, an impressive work of fiction and devoutly Christian. You are, of course, free to disagree. Willie and Mac, for example, who partner in recounting the uncanny events that befell Mac at the Shack after the great sadness, seemed far less certain of the cold, hard, as it were, inerrant facts of the matter than I am. And quite a few readers, apparently, unaware that what passes for Christian and Christian churches is always a target of God's fierce whimsy, doubt the book's Christian credentials, and therefore they rejoice or they fulminate. Now the rejoicers, like countless other readers, attest that this book brings them more than a measure of new light, renewed hope, forgiveness, and challenge, good news, one might call it. Please do not be dismayed then when I say that I find it not only Christian, but devout. After all, God's grace is so bounteous that it may come unexpectedly even by ways of Christianity. As for the fulminators, the Shack has its critics. Among them are several famed champions of latter-day right-wingisms, and with a King James Bible concordance in one hand and an old-time religion dictionary of church history in the other, they can find more heresies in this brief 250-page book than one can find orcs in Lord of the Rings. To have opponents such of these, of course, is something that any thoughtful and compassionate Christian theologian might well expect and boast of, if boasting were Christian. As for me, it's been a long time, I admit, since I bothered with any recent Christian fiction. Much of it, you know, has been written by notably privileged, talented authors who, repenting of their myth-spent youth, used their gifts thereafter to promote some form of Christianity even more authoritarian than once they scorned. And the shack is a very welcome exception to this rule. It witnesses to the immensity of God's love, the inclusivity of its embrace, and its power to turn the little boxes into which we humans try to, well, stuff it, topsy-turvy. It is a book at heart all about grace and relationship and freedom. And in this respect, as well as in its pointed, sometimes snarky jibes at Christianity, Christians might well think of an author like young Martin Luther, who, flushed with delight at realizing the total unconditionality of God's love, writes a work called Christian Freedom and takes potshots at the religious establishment. Truth be told, though, the book's lineage is less Luther or Augustinian per se, early or late, but more Puritan. A conversion narrative, I wager. But please read it anyway. It's a lot more enjoyable than any of that genre. The shack is a product of the theological imagination. Above all, it is theologically thought-provoking. I wish its author had gone to Bright Divinity School. But then again, if he had, maybe he wouldn't have written as he did, and that would be our loss. With that, I take pleasure in reintroducing to you William Paul Young. Paul?
That was great. Do it again. Oh, man. I really enjoyed that. I'm going to have a special, here's what's funny. Nicholas, he's my 27-year-old. I said, Nicholas, this is the weirdest thing. 2 years ago this month, I was shipping out soldering tips and cleaning toilets in a little manufacturer's rep warehouse. And I said, you know what? I'm talking in front of thousands of people. And 2 years ago, nobody cared what I had to say about anything. And I'm as dumb as I was 2 years ago. But one of the side benefits of this whole crazy thing is that I get to do stuff just because I want to. And one of them is, I have a friend named Melanie who's going to come and sing. And I've never heard her sing before. I just heard about it. And that was enough. And so, Melanie, she's doing it because I asked her to. So for all of us, I believe this is a gift.
Walk with
Sweet.
God bless you. Praying for you. Mwah.
I didn't think PhDs were allowed to sing like that. Definitely not allowed to clap like that or snap like that. That's so great. I'm going to do a couple introductory remarks. We're going to go right to Q&A. For a reason, because Q&A always takes us back to something, but it gives you a chance to ask some of your questions. Just for the short version, if you don't know this, in a nutshell, I'm not a real author. Okay? I'm an accidental one at best. I never intended to publish anything in my whole life, and I wrote this for my 6 children. They're 16 to 29 years old, 4 boys and 2 girls, and 15 copies at Office Depot was my whole intention. And I did that just after Christmas in 2005, and my friends kept giving it away, which became the problem. And eventually 26 publishers turned it down, so a couple friends created a publishing company. And we pooled our resources and watched God do an absolute phenomenon. It's a phenomenon, because it never has happened in the history of publishing, what's happened with the Shack. We're now between 11 and 14 million copies in 30 languages, and it's just unprecedented. It's kind of shook up the industry a bit, and all of it, I'm so glad I had no idea what I was doing. So, I'm serious. It's wild. I want to tell you my favorite joke. And you'll understand why it's my favorite joke. Actually, it's my only joke, but it's really my favorite one. And here's how it goes. You know, there's a guy that gets to heaven, and he sees the pearly gates, but he's not sure whether he's just supposed to walk in or not. You know, and Peter sees him in his consternation and comes out to meet him. And so he says to Peter, well, so do I just walk in or what? And Peter said, well, it depends. He says, it depends on something? Yeah. So what does it depend on? Well, it depends on how many points you have. Really? How many points do I need? Well, you need 100. I need 100 points to get in? Well, yeah. Well, I worked down at the soup kitchen for the last 15 years. I mean, every Saturday night. I mean, I just down there and volunteer working with the poor and stuff. Peter goes, yeah, that's good. I'll give you a point for that. A point? Yeah. Well, I was a pastor for 35 years. I mean, you know, I'm married and buried people, and I preached on Sundays, and I only took vacations when my contract said. And Peter goes, I don't know. 35 years. He said, okay, I'll give you a point for that. So now he's a little worried, you know, kind of thinking, that's kind of my whole life is I got 2 points. And as he's there in this quandary, he sees this other guy from the same town. And he knows him. I mean, he's a nice enough guy. He shows up to church a couple times a year and, you know, has a little business downtown. But he walks right past them and in through the pearly gates. And he turns to Peter and he says, are you telling me that he's got 100 points? And Peter says, no, he just doesn't play this game. See? That's why it's my favorite joke. Because it's really got a stinger on the end. And a lot of us have grown up inside a religious kind of Christianity that it's all about playing that game, earning enough points to win the affection and the approval of God. And it doesn't work, because we already have the affection and the approval of God. And it's not about performing our way into a place where then he's, okay, finally we've met his criteria. This is a God who knows we're so lost in our mess that he comes and pursues us. I have a friend named, what is his name, actually? Ron. And Ronnie's my friend because of the book. And here's what happened. 2 years ago, I'm working in this little manufacturer's rep office. I actually had 2 other jobs on the side. But I'm working in this manufacturer's rep office, and my boss, Mike, who's also a friend of mine, who owns it, he says, hey, you can get your emails here. Because the book was starting to take off, and he thought, this is really amazing, right? So in pops this email, and it simply says, you've ruined my life in the best possible way. I don't know if you ever go to coffee, but if you do, here's my phone number. Ron Graves. Well, you know, you get one of those, and I just immediately thought, why not? So I pick up the phone and called him. And I said, he answers, and I say, so where do you want to go to coffee? And he says, well, I live in Park Rose. And I said, yeah, I know. And so we talked logistics for a couple minutes, and then he says, I go out to coffee a lot, but normally by the time that I'm done talking to someone on the phone, I can figure out who I'm talking to. Who are you? I said, what do you mean, who am I? I mean, you're the one that sent me the email inviting me to coffee. And it's kind of like the dime drops, right? Are you kidding me? You know, so that's how I met Ron Graves, who I'd never met, never heard of, had nothing to do with before this. And we decided to get together that afternoon at a little coffee shop in Gresham, Oregon, called Cafe Delirium. Cafe D for short. So I've been asking God, I was saying to the Lord the weeks prior to this, I need some intercessors. I mean, some people that would just pray because of some of the things that are happening with this story. I just feel like we're a little bit unprepared. Well, it turns out Ronnie's an intercessor. Not only is he an intercessor, he's part of a whole network of them. And not only that, he's an Irish Catholic background who played semi-professional rugby for 21 years. I mean, this is not a mamby-pamby guy. This is a man's man, right? Ron Graves, rugby player. Well, I'm Canadian, and believe it or not, I played rugby. I used to be like 6'8". Actually, I was a hooker. Okay? That's a position in rugby. I don't know if... Goes to the smallest guy on the team. And if you're a good team, you'll go through 2 or 3 hookers in a season. And so I love saying that. I don't know. I just, So I'll explain it to you if you want to know what a hooker is. But so we start talking rugby, and we just connect on so many different levels. Well, we then walk down to the city park and to meet his family, because they're coming back from a mission trip to Mexico. And we're sitting on a park bench. Ronnie's sitting next to me, and I'm sitting here. And 2 of his really big guy friends come over. One of them sits across from me, and he says, "So, how do you know Ronnie?" I said, "Well, we met on the internet." Ronnie's laying on the ground laughing so hard he can't, After that, I was always introduced. This is Paul, Ronnie's Canadian hooker he met on the internet. Well, Ronnie and I become really close friends, and we meet as regularly as we can. Normally, it's St. Arbuck's. And because, I can get my chai tea. What? That's what it says, St. Arbuck's. Okay? And so Ronnie and I get together, and we were together this one Sunday morning, early on, and Ronnie says to me, we're talking about how does God look at us? How does God see us? And Ronnie says, well, as he's getting in his truck, he says, Paul, you know who God told me I am to him? I said, who? And Ronnie says, God told me I'm his champion. And as soon as he said it, I knew it was right. I mean, it so fits Ronnie. Of course, he's God's champion. I mean, that's perfect. And me, with my sense of humor, I said, well, you know who I am. And I'm just talking off the top of my head saying this, because I didn't have a clue what I was going to say. He says, who? And I said, well, I'm the court jester. And he laughs, gets in his truck. I take 2 steps towards home, and it's like the Holy Spirit just stops me cold and says, no, you're not. I mean, it was one of those, boom, no, you're not. It was so strong I had to pull out my phone and dial Ronnie and say, Ronnie, when I just told you that I'm the court jester? I'm not. But I do know who I am now. And he says, well, who? And I'm saying this, and I didn't premeditate this at all. It's just coming out my mouth. And I'm saying, I'm the enigma and the joke and the riddle that's in the mouth of the court jester. And he goes, oh, that is so true. I don't even know what it means. Right? So I walk back to the house. I walk in and I tell Kim about this conversation. I'm the enigma, the riddle, and the joke that's in the mouth of the court jester. And she goes, oh, that is so true. Who thinks about court jesters? I don't think about court jesters. I haven't thought about court jesters since I was in elementary school. And suddenly, I'm the riddle and the joke and the enigma that's in the mouth of the court jester. That was Sunday. During the week, Mike, my buddy, my friend, who's my boss, says to me, Paul, we got an invitation from General Tool. That's a distributor of ours. And 18 holes of golf at Resort at the Mountains. Now, that's up on Mount Hood. It's beautiful. And I'd been there maybe 15 or 17 years earlier. And I golf a couple times a year, whether I need it or not. And especially if I can go with someone who's really serious, because they're fun to watch. And so he said, here's what we get. 18 holes of golf. You get a golf cart. We get a barbecue. Plus everybody gets a door prize from General Tool. You want to go? Well, yeah. So he said, but I want to go out for breakfast. Great. So I drop off my car Saturday morning. This is the Saturday after this strange conversation with Ronnie. And so we go up to Mount Hood. And it's kind of an exclusive, beautiful place. And we walk into the dining room because he wanted to go up for breakfast. And I stand there looking into the dining room and I can't believe what I see. The whole place is completely packed with court jesters, with the little beanie things. I'm serious. I didn't even know these guys existed. The Royal Order of Jesters decided to have their national convention at Resort at the Mountains that Saturday. Right? I'm looking at them and I'm going, there were 101 court jesters. They had their own tent out on the golf course. Ha, 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 every time you walk by, So I walked up to the first table and I said, I got friends who will not believe me if I tell them you guys are here. So do you have a souvenir I could have? Right? And they said, you got to talk to him. So I go over, and it's the director for the Royal Order of Jesters. And he gave me the director's pin for the Royal Order of Jesters. And then he says to me, well, you know what a jester is, right? And I went, sure, yeah. No, actually, I don't. He said, well, let me tell you. He says, look, the jester was the highest advisor to the king. In fact, the jester had... Hello? I'll tell you about a cell phone in a second. But a jester, it was his job to communicate. This is great because nobody's reaching for their phone. The jester, it was his right, through any means necessary, to communicate both to the king and to the audience what the truth really was. Right? And suddenly I'm thinking, throughout literature, Jesus has often been referred to as Harlequin or the court jester. And then it strikes me. And I get to be the riddle and the enigma and the joke that's in the mouth of the court jester. And I tell you, that hit me like a ton of bricks. Because I'm thinking about this little book, And as we'll talk this evening, you'll hear more about where I come from. And why my wife and my friends would say, yeah, this is one of God's cosmic jokes, right? That you would be in the middle of this. People ask, how does your family and your friends relate to all this? And I say, we laugh all the time. It's funny. But it's an enigma too. And there's a riddle involved. And that has become really, really significant to me. This is not about me. I gave 15 copies to my family and friends, and it did everything that I wanted it to do. What has happened since then is a God thing. And I don't even begin to understand it. But I don't have to. And the controversy and stuff, that's a God thing too. Right? It doesn't bother me. It's not even about me. It's about people struggling with their own paradigms and things that have them inside their own boxes. So, the cell phone thing, we used to live in a town for 17 years called Boring, Oregon. Literally, it's a noun and an adjective, And, we were there when the first street light came in. We'd go down on Friday nights to watch it change. And this is Boring, Oregon. Now, home of the Boring Baptist Church. And we had a Boring Burger, went out of business. And, but it's called Boring. We lived there for 17 years. Kim's father, my wife's father, my father-in-law, lived with us for 17 years. And his name is Willard. We all called him Willie. He's the Willie in the book, is Kim's dad. And now Kim's from Minnesota, North Dakota, salt of the earth family. They're loud, they talk a lot, they tell you the truth, stuff like that I'm not used to. And, because I'm from a little religious family where we hide everything and lie about almost everything. And so we were at this wedding. This is my cell phone story. We were at this wedding. And it was they don't have a St. Boring, so it was some other St. Episcopal church in St. Andrew, I think. But it was a traditional wedding, one where they have, and we don't have a lot of those in Oregon. Normally we don't have the little section where, if anybody here has any reason why these two shouldn't, have sex legally, I don't know what they say, whatever they say, is there any reason why these two shouldn't, then speak now or forever hold your peace? We don't do that in Oregon normally because you'd be there like all night. And So they had this moment of silence. Now, I totally believe that God has a sense of humor. As soon as you have three people anywhere, you're going to have some laughter and either that or a war, But when you have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit who've been around each other forever, you got to know laughter came from somewhere. It didn't come from the fall. And because some of the purest, clearest times you have in relationship is when everybody's laughing. Well, we don't know how this happened, and we haven't been able to duplicate it, but my phone didn't just go off during this moment of silence. It went right to speaker. And Kim's sister Lynette, in a very booming voice, says, "Hey, Paul, are you still in that silly wedding or what?" And she said my name. I couldn't go, "Nicholas, turn your phone off," So I don't care when phones go off. It's really okay. Now, by the way, we've moved from Boring since the book came out. We live now in Happy Valley. Well, actually, we lived for a while in Happy Valley. And there's one town in between Boring and Happy Valley. To get from Boring to Happy Valley, you have to go through Damascus. That's true. True. If you're ever in Oregon, you can travel from Boring to Happy Valley, but you have to go through Damascus. I know there's a sermon in there somewhere. Okay. So, my family, very different from Kim's family. Missionary kid, preacher's kid. That's kind of messy up, seriously. And issues with growing up the way that I did. Anyway, we're going to take a break from that, have some of your questions, and those questions will funnel me back into some of the stories that I want to get to, because that's what normally happens. And but it'll give you a chance to ask some of your questions. How many have actually read this thing? That's cool. Good. Good. So open season. There's a mic there. If you have a booming voice, I'll repeat your question, but make yourself available to the mic. If you don't have any questions, I got a bunch. And so, yes, go ahead and help yourself.
Since we're near divinity school, I'm going to use a divinity term. Your book really addresses the question of theodicy.
Yes.
Evil and suffering in relation to God. It's a fairly new term for me, but I think your book really nails it. I loved it. I did a lot of thinking about theodicy in my mid-20s, and the best I could frame it was, I call it the parable of the pit bull. Imagine a little child playing on the sidewalk, and there's a pit bull on a leash, and the man's walking down the sidewalk with it, and the pit bull mauls the child to death. Well, who is at fault? The pit bull was the proximal cause of the child's death. The child was just playing on the sidewalk. The man had full cognition and power. He could have pulled back on the dog, but he didn't. So if the little child represents us, the people of earth, the dog is the devil, and the man is God, who's responsible for evil? So how can God be responsible for evil but not be evil?
Yeah. Good question. Next. No. Thank you. No. I appreciate that. The book is actually being taught as a theodicy textbook now in some seminaries.
Great.
And see, the book is made up of a whole bunch of questions that I wasn't allowed to ask when I was growing up, and that was one of them. If we got a God who is good all the time, and he is all-powerful, then how come he doesn't stop this? Right? And there's a lot of ways to approach it, and I've approached it a couple different ways in the book. But one of the ways that we don't talk about is God's respect for his creation that is so much greater than our own respect. That God truly respects us as his incredible creation. We don't think of ourselves as incredible or intricate or beautiful or magnificent. And as a result, it's all about territory and making sure that those people don't infringe upon my rights and my territory and what's due me. And so we want justice done on them. Right? We want God to step in and stop them. But it's okay if I maintain control of my life and I do things that are, not as hurtful as those people. Right? And the way you understand somebody's justification, how they think about justification, is how they excuse their behavior. That tells you how they're justified. Right? And so in theodicy, it's a way bigger picture. And part of what I try to do is say, at what point does God then stop the person from perpetrating evil? I mean, does it go right back to you telling a little white lie? Is that where, does he then stop you at that point? Because these things always ripple out. And in my great sadness, which is primarily sexual abuse and a very angry father who was an abusive disciplinarian, those are two of the great elements of my great sadness. Why didn't God stop that, right? And that's part of the question that Mackenzie has to deal with in this conversation. And God takes responsibility in the sense for, I created this. So I'm in the middle of it to redeem it. But he is not the author of evil, while he promises to show up in the middle of it to bring healing and forgiveness and reconciliation and all those things, which wouldn't occur if God wasn't in the middle of it. So all of those elements are there. Yeah, there's still mystery to it, and there's still tension in it. And that tension is probably most readily recognized when your child dies of cancer, or your child gets hit by the drunk driver, or your child gets abused, That's where it really gets the worst. It's the worst pain that a human being can experience, as far as I'm concerned, is the loss between a parent and a child. The closest we get to beginning to understand the love of God is the way a parent loves a child. That's the closest. It says, if you being wicked know how to agape your children. That's the only verse that I am aware of in Scripture where agape, God's kind of love, and wickedness, or twistedness, because wicker is an old English term for, the twisting, where wickedness and agape are put in the same context. And that is how we love our children. So that becomes the place where loss is the greatest, and it becomes the best reflection. Plus it asks the best questions. And theodicy is one of the central ones of those. Yeah.
I appreciate being allowed to be here tonight. I thought I was going to my family reunion, but I guess I got to. Just kidding.
We won't tell them.
It was the book, there was a part in there where you described what God looked like. And I thought, after I laughed for so long at your choice of what he would look like, and then the reason that the it was given why God looked like that. And I thought, those are some of my same problems. I have this imagination as to what God looks like, and then because of that, it causes me to act a certain way and do certain things. And it was very refreshing to hear in the book why God chose to appear, and Jesus and the Holy Spirit. So I wonder if you just elaborate a little bit of your thoughts as to why you did that.
Yeah. Yeah, it caught a few people off guard, actually. And it's like this little old black lady in Palo Alto, which is the hood side of one of the richest counties in the United States. She says, "You can't tell me some little old white guy wrote this book." Yeah, you have to be there. And I grew up black. See, I didn't grow up white. I grew up in the highlands of New Guinea among a tribal, spirit-worshipping, warring, cannibalistic tribe. And because you grow up a certain way, you think everybody grows up that way. I thought everybody grew up around cannibals, you know? And but that was my world. In fact, I didn't know I was white till I went to boarding school when I was 6 years old. And it was a huge disappointment. And I'm still kind of disappointed about it, actually. But it was my first major culture shock when I had to I realized, what, I'm one of them, you know? Because my parents, I did not connect with them. I was 10 months old when I went in, but my parents were part of a generation that was told, look, you're doing the work of God. You're spreading the gospel. You focus on what you're doing and God will take care of the details. You know, and kids were details. And my parents are in their early 20s, mid-20s, and they don't know how to deal with this kind of a situation. They're not trained in cultural contextualization or spiritual warfare even. There's just nothing here. And they're walking into a situation where my dad didn't even know how to be a father. He'd come out of a horrible situation, become a believer in his late teens, went right to Bible school, and then right to the mission field 5 years later. No skills, right? And so he brought all his anger and then dumped it squarely on me because I was the firstborn child. So he communicated early on that I didn't belong to him. And I didn't want to be around him. I mean, he hit way too hard. So the tribal people would pick me up in the morning and then drop me off at night. And my mother is a medical missionary, so she was focused on that whole dimension. They didn't know the language. I learned it right off the bat. Donnie was my first language. When I was 5 years old, Wycliffe came in and I was the informant. Right? Because I'm the only one in the world that could speak Donnie in English. They'd never seen white people before us. And when they talked about killing my parents, with me around, I never felt in danger because I wasn't a ghost person. I wasn't a moongat until I got to boarding school and found out I was. So that was my world. If you'd put the Donnie tribal people on a blackboard or whiteboard, and then my parents over here and said, draw a circle around your family, my entire life there would have been no hesitation. Would have been around the Donnie. When I went to boarding school at 6, I came back 4 months later. I called my mother Aunt Betty. Because at boarding school, there was this white woman named Betty. I mean, everybody called her a Betty. Actually, her name was Betty White. So I figured that's what you call white women. They're Bettys. Right? That's how disconnected I was from my mom. So I'm around lots of stuff that my parents had no clue, but they were focused on the work of God, right? Well, sexual abuse inside the tribe started around age 4. My really strong memories are about age 4.5 and continue from there. And you can twist and damage the heart of a child in unbelievable sorts of ways. By the time I'm 6, I'm a predator to some degree because I'm looking for sexual situations. Part of the confusion of what happens when you push a child past all those boundaries into this experience is that some of it feels good, which really confuses you down the road. So I go to boarding school, missionary boarding school, and the first night the big boys come and molest us first graders, which just compounds this whole thing. So I'm disconnected from my parents. Now I'm disconnected from the tribe. Now sexual abuse becomes the frame of reference in which I function, and everything becomes about shame. I knew as a 5-year-old and as a 6-year-old that I could not talk to my parents, that it was too dangerous, especially my dad. And I was already ashamed, and I didn't even know why. And so when I had the night terrors, you know, where I would wake up screaming because of the night terrors that were involved in all this, my parents didn't know what to do. And I never told them. I mean, literally, they would, some of the tribal people would form a circle 20 feet away from my parents, and the sexual stuff would be going on 20 feet away from them. And my parents didn't have a clue. So there was all this kind of crap that was happening. Well, what do you do with that? Well, as a child, God has built into human beings, even children, a remarkable ability to survive. You find a way, either that or you curl up and you just die. And everything becomes about safety. right? It's about staying safe. Now, the metaphor of the book in terms of the shack is this. It's the heart, the soul, heart, mind, the soul of a human being. In the case of the book, it's mind. It's the house on the inside that people help you build. And a lot of us didn't get good help. And so it's a shack. Some people, their foundations are good. They were raised among an environment of love and acceptance and respect. A lot of us weren't. So we got a shack. So what do? The shack is where you then hide all of your addictions and you store all your secrets. You know why we keep secrets, right? We keep secrets because we're terrified. We're terrified that if we tell our secrets, we will lose what affection and approval we've managed to scrabble together. But here's the trap. When people offer us affection and approval, we can't accept it. We can fake like we accept it, but we don't really trust it because they don't know the secrets. If they knew the secrets, they wouldn't be giving us this approval and affection. So we're trapped by secrets. We can't tell them because we're terrified we will lose the approval and the affection, but we can't accept approval and affection because they don't know the secrets. You understand? It's a horrible place to be. And we are as sick as the secrets we keep, but we store them in the shack. All of our addictions we keep in the shack. It's a house of shame and pain. What do you do with the pain? You know, because shame goes somewhere. And even if we try to shut it away, and one of the survival mechanisms is to learn how to disassociate pain from the rest of your life. So what you do is inside this little house, on the inside, you have closets in which you stuff the pain. So when somebody is coming at you in abuse or is going to beat the hell out of you, you take that pain and you just disappear into this place where you feel nothing and you think nothing. And you shove all that pain in there and slam the door on it and hope the poison doesn't leak out into the rest of the house, which it always does. And you become this person who is so ashamed of who you are on the inside that you've got to compensate some way. And some people try to sex the pain away or drink it away or drug it away or they run into busyness, or worse, ministry or whatever. But they're trying to deal with that pain. So what a lot of us do in the religious context, what I did is I created a facade on the outside of the shack. Like in Hollywood, it's a 1/4-inch piece of plywood that looks like a building, but is really not anything. Right? But see, the beauty of a facade, yeah, it's all fake, but the beauty of it is you can paint it as fast as you can pick up people's expectations. So for one group of people, they want you to be this kind of a person, so you can paint that and be that kind of a person, but you can be a totally different person over here. And you can function fairly well out here as long as you shut the pain inside somewhere. And it's remarkable. You can function out here like you're a normal human being when all this crap is going on inside. You got your addictions and everything else taking place, and you don't want anybody in the shack. That's the last thing you want. Right? So you got a facade out here, and you're hoping that, like Geppetto, that if you believe in that facade long enough and pray hard enough and study the Bible hard enough, that facade will become you. It will become a living person instead of a piece of wood. And you're trying to please people, and you're trying to please God. And you develop ways of staying safe. That is keeping the facade hiding the shack. What I ended up with is a thin layer of perfectionist performance that covered up an ocean of shame. And anytime somebody popped something down through that thin layer of perfectionist performance, Paul, you're not everything that you think you are. Bam! Up would come the shame. And I had one of two responses, fight or flight. And I'm 5'6" and a wish. I look tall when I'm up here by myself, but I'm little. I've lost every fist fight I've ever been in. So I learned to hide knives inside words. And as a person who's outside the box, I see the inconsistencies and they become weapons. And I learned how to turn a conversation back on a person so fast their head would spin and they wouldn't know what hit them. And especially if I could use religious language to do it, I could really put them in their place. It's just a deflection away from what they're saying about me. It's a survival skill. And if somebody keeps poking a hole down through my stuff and my shame is there, I never said I ran away. I would say, I hear God call me somewhere else. Like anywhere else. All right? Survival skill. I went to 13 schools before I graduated high school. I'm good at leaving and trying to start over again. But the problem is, you drag the shack wherever you go because it's your own soul. So what do? You keep pushing it back, and then they come up with theologies that make you really ashamed of yourself. Like people say, I don't go to church because I already feel bad enough about myself. And we have a theology of a God who hates the shack And you're trying to be, and they tell you that, hey, you're born again. How come there's still crap in your life? No, there's not. In his. Go look at him, right? All these ways. Another survival skill. It's called hypervigilance. Walk in a room like this. I know where all the entrances are. I know where the exits are. I can hear my name come up anywhere in the room. It's just like you have radar that goes out. It's called hypervigilance. They actually train people who deal with terrorists in this. But for abuse victims, it becomes part of their way of surviving. I don't do that anymore. I don't have to. But I functioned that way most of my life. And it takes a huge amount of energy. You're not even thinking about what you're doing. You're just trying to make it from day to day to the next event to the next event. And you're trying to repress all your bad behaviors, because spirituality is defined by behavior. All of these things. And I performed really well. And I'm an adapter. I'm a missionary kid, so I can move in and out of culture. So I adapted. I graduated Phi Beta Kappa Summa Cum Laude, and I walked out with my degree thinking, I fooled them. And if you're in a room like this, and somebody comes in from one part of your world, and there's another person from this part of your world, and you're a Christian and you can't kill them, you have to spin the stories. And everything becomes a web of lies, and you have to keep track of what you said to what person in order to kind of keep some semblance. And when it starts to cave in that's when you hear God call you somewhere else. And you run. So I'm praying to God. My pursuit of my relationship with Jesus started when I was a child. When the Donny people came to Jesus en masse, I went with them. And God became the only person who was there all the time. And I pursued God with everything that was in me. And I always have. Even though my caricature of God was Gandalf with an attitude, right? Was that bearded white guy who was disappointed, disgruntled, who Jesus had to talk into liking me at all. Right? It's kind of, my vision was this, I get to go to God's house because Jesus invited me. And I'm kind of the little orphan standing in the kitchen in the living room when God comes around the corner and spots me. And he goes, Jesus, can I talk to you for a minute here? Right? And they go in the kitchen and I can hear what they're saying. And God's saying, why is he here? Well, Dad, I invited him. I know, but every time he comes over here, he leaves a mess. He leaves the toilet seat up. He doesn't do his dishes. He drags mud in from outside. But Dad, I love him. Oh, okay, but if he screws up one more time, he is so out of here. That's kind of this edge thing that I wanted. And the only way to keep off the edge was to rededicate your life to Jesus, which I did hundreds of times. The evidence of which is having a quiet time. Which is why I had to rededicate my life hundreds of times. I don't know about you, but quiet times work for people, I've heard. For some people they're built that way. Me? I've never been able to have that. And it was always this, I went to Bible school where you learn how to hide the fact you're screwed up. And part of it was, having a quiet time as evidence of your real commitment to God. It was always some ungodly hour of the morning, which makes total sense to me. And, at 4 o'clock in the morning or something, it had to be really painful, And I'd show up and God would show up, but neither of us had anything to say, After a while, one of us would fall asleep. It wasn't always me either. Since healing in my life, I still don't have a consistent quiet time. I just don't feel bad about it anymore. Because it's not the way I'm designed. And I'm okay with that. For some people, it's how they're designed, and I love that for them. I just don't make anything a formula anymore. So I'm struggling, I'm trying to pursue God, and here's what I'm telling God. How come you don't heal me? Because here's what I wanted God to do. I wanted him to heal me without exposing me. I wanted him to come sneaking around the facade, heal me, so that nobody else would know what a mess I was. And I'm praying and saying, how come you don't? I'm giving you everything that I can give you. Study and scripture reading and money and involvement and fasting and prayer and nothing's changing. And I'm begging God, please heal me. So God sets a trap. Her name is Kim. And Kim walks I'm in charge at this point. I graduated from college and I'm in charge of the college kids. And there's like 300 to 700 of them at any given time. And we have Friday nights where we all get together and do stuff. And I'm in charge of Friday night. And Kim walks in with 2 of her 5 sisters. And I see her. And I immediately change what I'm planning to do so that we can break up into groups of 2 and pray for each other. Power corrupts. That's how I met her. Well, we became friends. And over the course of our friendship, we actually ended up living on opposite sides of a duplex. She with some of her friends and me with some guys, and we would eat common meals and stuff, and we became friends. But during this time, I've been told that I started to get quite interested in this girl named Cheryl. Now, the reason I don't know is, here's what happened. There was this day that I was out jogging, because I'm 5'6", you got to do something, right? And so I'm being fit, right? So I'm out jogging, and Kim had asked me to go pick up her car, which was parked in the East Hill Church parking lot across Division Street. And Division is 2 ways, both directions, 2 lanes, both directions, and a center turning lane in the middle. I got hit by a high-risk 17-year-old driver doing 55 miles an hour in the center turning lane. And he knocked me a half a block. And I landed in a heap in front of the pastor's house as he was walking out the door to get in his car to go to the airport to go speak somewhere. And he's an ex-EMT. So he was on me in a flash. Within 2 minutes, 2 off-duty police officers were coming up the hill one way, and an off-duty ambulance was coming the other direction. And they all converged on me. And they've told me that I never lost consciousness during this whole next period of time, even when they were operating, because they had to do it without anesthetics. And they said I screamed because they didn't want me to go into a coma, and because of the head injuries, and which I'm glad I don't remember that part. But they said I was loopy, which I didn't know was a technical term. It means this. So what happened anyway? Well, Paul, you were in an accident. You were hit by a car. Oh, so what happened anyway? Like for 24 hours, that's all I would do is just cycle this loop, where I was lost in this loop. Well, I come to conscious awareness a couple of days later, where I am consciously aware of myself, and I'm throwing up. That's my first memory coming out of this thing. And the nurse who's standing there says, you might be allergic to Demerol, because you did the same thing when we gave it to you downstairs. You want to give it to me again so we can be sure? I'm thinking, what? Well, I suddenly realize I don't know where I am. And not only do I not know where I am, I don't even know who I am. I don't know what year it is, and I don't know what country I'm in. I don't know anything relationally. I know what a bed is and what food is, but I don't know anything about relationships, except during this whole period of time, I knew I had a relationship with Jesus. That's the only relationship that made its way through this whole period of damage. That's the only thing I knew. And because of that, I was okay. I was at peace. I'm going, okay. Kim comes to visit, walks in the door, bursts into tears because I'm kind of a mess, and runs out, and I'm thinking, boy, she's cute. Over the next weeks, chunks of memory come back. Some things never came back. Cheryl never came back. I have one little tiny memory sitting in a car talking to her, and that's the only memory that ever came back, which really pleased her. What am I supposed to do? Come on, I don't know you, right? And she had this relationship that she had in mind, and I didn't know that it existed. So she married somebody else shortly after that. And so suddenly, I'm trying to put back the pieces of my life to try to figure out who I am and how this all works. Well, big chunks come back, and eventually a lot of it came back. During my recuperation, I go on a trip to Canada, partly because I want to go back and visit places that I've been, trying to reconnect some of the dots. While I'm on this trip, I really believe I hear God speak to me and say, Paul, marry Kim. Which is a total violation because, see, I've been saying, I don't think I'll ever get married because I can be like Paul, I can do great things for the kingdom of God if I stay single. It's all BS, but it really sounds good, And it's because you're freaking out is what the real reason is. But I really feel God speak to me and say, marry Kim. Which I think is not a bad idea. But I'm thinking, how am I going to ask her? Because we haven't even really dated. Oh, I figure I'll ask her in a group setting because that would be safer. Guys are stupid. What can I tell you? I mean, we all marry up. So I decided to have this party to welcome us home. So I get about 15 of my closest friends, including Kim, to have this party to welcome us back from our trip. And I made cards for everybody, wrote out cards, and pretty creative, pretty insightful cards, really sweet things, And Kim's just says, "Will you marry me?" So I palm hers to the bottom when I shuffle. What? So I shuffle up the cards, but I keep hers on the bottom because I'm figuring as soon as she reads her card, then it's kind of party over, And so we're going around the room, and the rule was you had to read it out loud before you pre-read it. And it's really sweet. Everybody's, very thankful. And comes to Kim, and she goes, And here's what went through her mind. She would tell you this if she was standing here. What went through her mind was, if I say no, he will never ask me again, which is true. But if I say yes, I can back out. You got to love this woman. So she said yes. We were married 11 days later. Everybody thought she was pregnant. She wasn't. So it really didn't please the religious establishment that I was working for. And I mean, the whole thing was just like this ripple that went through. Listen to me. If I'd have waited 12 days, I wouldn't have made it. As it was, I was running 104-degree temperature. I mean, it was because suddenly I'm realizing, oh, what have I done? Because see, one of the techniques of survival is leaving. And I'm creating a facade out here and trying to hope that it's real. See, and part of that is you don't leave. Not when you're married to somebody. Plus, I'm marrying somebody from Minnesota, North Dakota. And they're constantly putting holes down through your little perfectionist performance thing. And I'm going to be living with this woman? All my life, most of my life, suicide has been in the background as the way to finally escape. Especially when the pain got really, really bad. And Kim had no clue. See, she had never been in the shack. She had no clue about my history, about my addictions. She didn't know anything. And I wasn't about to let her in there. So, what do you do? Well, Kim didn't know, but I was suicidal from the day we got married. I mean, if we'd had a gun in the house, I wouldn't have made it 6 weeks. Here's what I learned about shame. Shame destroys your ability to distinguish between a value statement and an observation. Let me say that again, and then let me explain it. This will help some of you understand people who are in your life. Shame destroys your ability to distinguish between an observation and a value statement. For example, Kim would say, Paul, this happened early in our marriage. Paul, don't mix the colors with the whites. Laundry, right? What did I hear her say? Paul, I don't know why I married such a loser of a human being as you. See, thin layer of perfectionist performance, bam. Don't mix the colors with the whites. You're not perfect. I couldn't hear the observation. I could only hear the value statement. Shame destroys your ability to distinguish between an observation and a value statement. And when that would happen, I would drop into the same place that I would drop into when the abuse happened. And I couldn't think, and I couldn't feel anything. And Kim would say, are you okay? Are you in there? What are you thinking? Nothing. Because I wasn't. It's just locked. But I'm an adapter. You see, because I'm creative and fairly intelligent, I was able to maintain the facade way longer than I should have. I adapted. I learned to be a husband. And then I learned to be a father, largely by watching Kim and then her dad who came to live with us. And I adapted, and I did a good job. Probably better than many. I was a good husband, and I was a good father. And I was teaching. I was working in business, and I was speaking really good stuff. But the facade, it's all facade. Meanwhile, I'm trying to repress the addictions, but every once in a while they kind of, they're really hard to keep tabs on. And especially when I got really tired or when I was in pain or something, and the addictions would show up. But I hit them. Here's what I'd love to tell you. There came a point in my life where I finally realized how screwed up I was, so I went and found a counselor, and we began to straighten it all out. I'd love to tell you that that's what happened. It's not true. I got caught. I got caught. And there's a lot of us that's the only road of salvation. And the healing in our hearts is to get caught. And I got caught. Mackenzie spends a weekend in the shack that represents 11 years of my life. And those 11 years started January 4th, 1994, and took me to the end of 2004. And in 2005, I was finally at a place of healing such that I could write this story for my kids. January 4th, 94, I'm out to lunch with a guy. And I get a phone call from Kim on the opposite side of town from where my office is. And Kim, this is what she says. I'm at your office waiting for you, and I know. That's all she said. In that little sentence, my facade came crashing down in a million pieces. Because what she knew was I was in a 3-month affair with one of her best friends. In fact, it was the woman, when Kim sensed the distance between me and her, it was the woman she turned to for counsel. So the betrayal was unbelievably horrendous. I had to make a decision. When the facade comes down, everything that you're putting your hope in, everything you're trying to be, when it comes down, you only have the shack. And all the shame and everything else. And my decision was, face Kim or kill myself. See, the affair had totally caught me sideways. I'd run into somebody who didn't have any boundaries, because I don't have any boundaries at this point. My boundaries had been just shot ever since I was a kid. So I was always trying to pick up other people's boundaries and live inside of them. It had been so crazy because, see, when you have this facade, and especially if it's religious and it's perfectionist and all this, and you're behaving in a way that is totally contradictory, you've got to try to rearrange reality so that you can justify yourself. I thought Kim was going to die. I thought God was behind this unbelievable love affair that would then, become such a... it was sick to the core. I thought, finally, somebody loves me without condition. Which was, if it had been true, there's no way this person would have done this. There's no way I would have done this to this person and their family. So what do? I don't even know. I cannot tell you this day how I got from one side of town to my office. Don't know. But I find myself driving in to face Kim. And I walk in. This is right after my 6th child has been born. I walk in and Kim's already torn the place up. Literally, physically, torn it up. And she just lights into me for about an hour. And then when she stops, I say to her, okay, if we're going to do this, I have to tell you every secret I have. Because secrets have been killing me my whole life. And she said, bring it on. And it took me 4 days. 10 to 12 hours a day. And Kim wanted to know every detail about everything. And I told her. And at the end of those 4 days, she was destroyed. And she says to me, I will never believe another thing that comes out of your mouth the rest of your life. And I believed her. And every day she pounded at me. She couldn't understand how somebody could be one thing over here and another thing completely different. How could you be teaching these things and all this crap's going on? How could you do this to your kids? How could any human being do this to another human being? It just made no sense to her. How could you do this to their family and their kids? I went into counseling almost right away. I walked into this place called Agape Youth and Family Services, and all I knew was they specialized in sexual abuse histories. And they put me with this guy named Scott Mitchell. And Scott became my friend. And he became my counselor. And I sat in front of Scott the first day that I met him. And I said, Scott, my life's over. See, my life was the facade, and it's all gone. Now I got to deal with me. I'm saying I don't even know anymore how to get to point B, let alone Z. And I said, and I don't need a counselor who just asks me, oh, how do you feel about this? I need somebody who knows how to get me from point A to point Z. Do you know? And for the first time in my life, I said these words to another human being. Can you help me? Can you help me? I knew 2 things at this point for sure. I couldn't heal myself. And I've been trying 30-some years. If only I could pray enough or give enough or fast enough or read enough scripture or get involved enough. Only if maybe I could come to... It never worked. None of that touched any of the damage in the shack. None of it. And I finally knew I can't heal myself. And the second thing I knew, I can't heal anybody else either. And that included Kim. And Scott says, yeah, I can help you, but it's going to take 1.5 years. And I said, well, I'm in. He says, yeah, right. He says, everybody's sitting where you're sitting. They always say they're in. But after a couple months, you'll feel like you're in more control and things are better. And you'll bail out. Everybody bails out right before the really hard stuff. And I said, Scott, I promise you, I will not leave this process until you tell me I'm done. He said, good. Let's work. And we worked hard. And he was right. It got really hard. We worked every day, and I'd call Kim after my sessions with Scott, and I'd tell her everything that was going on. And every day she said the same thing. Yeah, right, whatever. But that was okay, because I couldn't heal her. The reason she let me stay in the house, a couple of reasons. One is, if possible, she didn't want the kids to grow up without a father. And the second reason, as angry as she was, and frankly, between you and I, part of what saved my life was the fury of my wife. She drove me to deal with every piece of garbage in my history. But the other reason she let me stay was she believed, as angry as she was, she believed that I had hit bottom. And one of the evidences of hitting bottom is you point a finger in no direction but at yourself. If you got anybody that points a direction somewhere else, they have not hit bottom yet. And at this point, I didn't care if any of it was her stuff. Didn't care. Didn't matter to me. This was all about my junk. And that's why I worked hard. One day I call and I'm bawling on the phone. Just bawling. I just had a time with Scott and we'd worked through some really difficult stuff. And for the first time, I could feel a boundary inside me. See, I didn't even know that was possible. Something inside me that I could say no. And I call Kim and I'm bawling. I'm saying, I got a boundary inside of me. And she says, yeah, right, whatever. And that was okay. Because I couldn't heal her. All I could do was whatever. And I'm thinking, it's going to be like this the rest of our lives. She cannot trust anything that is happening with me. Because the trust has been so violated. It got really hard. It's like, and I used this illustration back then talking about it, it's like Kim pushes me, pounds me to the edge of this cliff, and I'm looking down into this abyss, and it's got all my junk, and I'm thinking, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? Go back to before I'm 4 years old and find something that's alive? What's not a survival mechanism or a safety skill? What am I supposed to do? And I look and I'm thinking, you know what? I've puked on every relationship I've ever had. I've brought pain to everybody that I know. And all my hope left. And that's when I began planning a trip to Mexico because I didn't want my kids to find my body. I was done. What am I supposed to do? 2 friends showed up. Well, God showed up in 2 friends. One of them is named Kenny, and Kenny's a busted boy like me, except he just didn't hide it. And he goes to Kim without me knowing, and he goes to Kim and he says, Kim, I'm so sorry. You've come down from the mountain of normalcy to find out what some of us are like, and it's so not fair. You've been so hurt, and now you're supposed to be the one that forgives. I'm so sorry. But he says, all I can tell you is Paul is doing the best he knows how right now. And these are the words that Kenny then says to Kim. But Kim, I think if you hit him one more time, you're going to kill him. And Kim listened to Kenny and backed off just enough. Just gave me a little space. And Kitty comes to me at the same time, unbeknownst to each other. And Kitty says, Paul, tell me where you are. And I described standing, looking down at all this stuff. And I said, Kitty, all I am is a little piece of dried up shit that the wind is blowing away. And I'm terrified that when it's done blowing it away, there won't be anything left. And Kitty says this to me. Paul, there's a seed. A seed. I'm thinking a seed. There's a seed? And then I think, you know what? If there were a seed, even if there were just a seed, I don't care how tiny it is, if there were a seed, something could grow. I don't know what it is, but something could grow. And then I'm thinking, seeds, they grow good in this kind of stuff. Literally, that's what came across my mind. That little seed, in that little seed, all my hope came back. A seed. That day was the last day I was ever suicidal in my life. Because of a seed, but something real, something alive that said there can be something that grows and you matter. I worked hard. 9 months, Scott says, you're done. He said, we've never had anybody work this hard and stay with it. And he knew it was life or death for me. If I couldn't find some healing, what's the point? I'm driven towards authenticity. If I can't find it, what's the point? And I worked at rebuilding trust, and just one step in front of the other one. And I worked hard in business, and I just did the right thing one day at a time. And I always told Kim what was going on. 11 years it took. 11 years to deal with all the junk, the fears, the concepts of God. A lot of the stuff that you find in the shack come out of those 11 years. At the end of 2004, I was one of the healthiest people that I knew. You see, I'm the same person in every situation now. And I didn't even know that was possible. I'm no different standing up here as when I'm in a hotel room by myself, or with this group of friends or that group of friends, with my family. I'm the same person. That's unbelievable. I don't have any addictions. And I'm not talking pornography and all those yucky ones that we talk about. I'm talking about the gold chain ones that we don't talk about. I'm not addicted to pleasing my dad. I'm not addicted to pleasing God. I'm not addicted to doing something significant. I'm not addicted to pleasing you. It took me 50 years to become a child. I wasn't one when I was little. It took me 50 years to finally believe that I was in a relationship with an adult who actually knew what he was doing and cared about me. It took me 50 years to really embrace the wonder of a God who actually is especially fond of me. And part of that was forgiving the abusers and forgiving myself. I don't have any secrets. Not any. There is nothing that my wife doesn't know about. And there's nothing my children don't know about. I have no secrets. I have no skeletons in my closet. They're all out. I have no reputation. They came out with the skeletons. A couple of years ago, in a circle of friends, because we did this publicly, we didn't do it. I said, we can't do this in secret. If my life's going to blow up, it's going to blow up in front of everybody, because I'm done with secrets. And a couple of years ago, in front of a group of friends who all know my history, Kim says to them in front of me these words: I never thought I would ever say this in my life, but it was all worth it. And what she's saying, there's nothing ever so dead that God can't grow something out of it. There's nothing so lost that He doesn't know where it is. There's nothing so broken that He can't heal it. And she was saying, this man is worth it. Kim and I are the best we have ever been, and better than we could have ever been if I was living behind a facade. So you begin to understand that this is an enigma. It's a riddle. It's a joke in the best possible way in the mouth of the court jester. It doesn't make any sense. But you know what? Grace doesn't make any sense. I haven't earned this. But apart from Jesus, we can do nothing anyway. There's no pedestals in the kingdom. I'm with the elders, man. We're throwing our crowns before the throne because we know the truth. We know where they came from. My friend Scott. Scott, checked with me every once in a while because I'm a friend. But I don't know anything about his family at this time because I'm a client, patient sort of category. And I didn't know that Scott's oldest son had become a methamphetamine addict. Now, I don't know if you know anything about meth, but it's the disaster drug of the decade. It sucks all the dopamine out of your system, and dopamine helps you regulate pain. And so when you don't have it in your system, even wearing jeans is a painful experience as it rubs against your sensors in your body. And dopamine gives you meth gives you a 200 times hit of dopamine that you have regularly in your body. So it's a movement totally out of that pain. Well, Scott had been working with his son to try to get him out of the addiction, and had gotten desperate about it to a degree that he had started saying to his buddies at in his Bible study group, he said, I would die for my son if it would help free him. And let me tell you, every parent who has a healthy relationship with their child, they know exactly what that means. I've got a daughter who's fighting a little brain tumor. It's a pituitary adenoma, benign brain tumor. But she was 20 weeks on her back before we got it diagnosed. And she takes chemo twice a week orally just to keep it regulated. But for 20 weeks, I would have exchanged places in a heartbeat. And Scott says, I would die for my son if it would help. But what he didn't know was that his son had actually bought a .22 pistol, not to hurt his father. He loves his father. He changed his mind and even tried to sell it back to the people who he bought it from, and they wouldn't take it. And he had it with him when this woman showed up at their house. It's a gal that's not supposed to come there because she was a trigger for the addiction. And so she shows up at the house, and Scott goes out to talk to his son and this woman. And the conversation gets heated. This is September 2004, the same time I'm coming right out. I'm at the last stages of dealing with the renovation of the shack, is how I put it. Lots of finish work yet to do, but, the renovation's pretty much done. September 2004. And Scott says to them, look, you know you're not supposed to be here. He says, you two, you just need to get off the premises. Just leave. And Scott turns around, walks into the house, shuts the door behind him and locks it, not realizing that his son is right behind him because he's barefoot. And he left his shoes in the house, and he was going back into the house to get his shoes. Well, when his son reaches for the door and he finds it locked, he gets angry, and he reaches for the gun, uses the butt of the gun to smash the window so he can open the door. Pow! The gun goes off, and he shoots his father in the heart and kills him. And I'm working downtown, and I get a phone call that says, Scott's been shot and killed by his own son. And I was so busted up, I couldn't even go to the funeral. I could not deal with it. That's September 2004. Beginning of 2005, Papa whispers in my ear and says, how about we make this a year of Jubilee? You turn 50 this year. And I went, that's a good idea. I'm kind of all over that. And joy dropped on our family and on what we were doing. And we ended up living in a little 900 square feet of house. And there were 6 of us, 3 of us women with 1 little bathroom. We lived 2 blocks away from Gresham High School, where Kim got a job working in the bakery. And I was working 3 jobs, and every month we had enough. And I wrote a little story for my kids. And we didn't have any money for Christmas, so after Christmas I got some money, and I went down and made 15 copies for my kids and my friends. And like I said earlier today, I said, my prayer was, Papa, I'm never going to ask you again to bless anything that I do, but if you've got something you're blessing, and it would be okay for me to be a part of it, I'd be all over it. And I don't care if I'm cleaning toilets or shining shoes or holding the door open. I just want to be with you. And it's like God says, well, this little story. How about if I bless that? You give it to your kids and then I'll give it to mine. 2005, I write it. 2006, some friends come around it. We start talking about it to publish it. We get it published. 26 publishers turn it down. We get it published ourselves in 2007, May of 07. A little after Christmas. 07, so early in 08. And I'm getting 50 emails a day by then from all over the world. And I get this email, and it says this. Like a lot of them, it starts out, you don't know me, but... And then they tell me a story. And this one says, you don't know me. But I really felt it was important that you understand how your little book has landed in the middle of my family's great sadness. You see, in September 2004, my oldest son shot and killed the father he loved, Scott Mitchell. And I look and it's Connie, Scott's wife, and she doesn't even know. And I email her back and say, Connie, can I have your phone number? I really need to talk to you. And she emails it back and I call her and I say, Connie, if it wasn't in part for Scott, I probably wouldn't be alive. And this book would never have been written. And Connie says, when you asked for my phone number, I turned to my brother-in-law and I said to him, I wonder if Paul is one of Scott's boys. And I am. I'm one of Scott's boys. And because this man helped me through one of the darkest times in my life, I was able to write a story that has landed right back in the middle of his family's great sadness. It's an enigma. I'm so grateful I now have 70,000 emails. I now have people who stand up doing Q&A, like the man in Portland recently, in his 40s, tears running down his face, and he says, I want to make a comment. I just got off the phone with my mom, who's been an avowed atheist her whole life, and she just called me and said, son, I read this book called The Shack. I now believe there's a God and that Jesus is the Son of God. A man writes and says, I've never written to an author before, never felt the need, but because of your book, The Shack, my son, from whom I've been estranged for over 40 plus years, went on a spiritual trek that took him by motorcycle from Atlanta, Georgia to Oak Grove, Oregon for a few-hour visit. He had sent me a surprising email simply saying, I'll be there in a few days bearing a great gift, which turned out to be a much-read dog-eared copy of The Shack, in the front of which he'd made various notations addressing them to Father. The one that means the most to me is, there is healing in the giving and receiving of forgiveness. So we did that, and much, much more. I'm up in a women's prison in Edmonton, Alberta. And this inmate comes after I'm done talking, and she falls into my arms, and as she's weeping, and between her tears, she says, do you really think Papa's fond of me? And I go, honey, he's especially fond of you. She says, that's all I needed to know. That's all I needed to know. And I'm thinking, that's all any of us needs to know. There is a God who is good all the time, who's involved in the details of our lives. I get an email. I've been giving The Shack to everybody at my work except this one woman, and I hesitated, and then I finally gave it to her, and then I kind of pestered her for a week, saying, well, what do you think? Finally, she turned to me and said, I can't read but a couple pages, and I start to fall apart. So I said to her, well, just let God in that place and see what he wants to do. He writes, she comes back to my station a little while later, chewing on a mint and telling me how nauseous she is, and then she drops the bomb. She says, nobody here knows. But in 1998, my 3-year-old daughter was murdered in a campground by my then boyfriend, not the father, and she was wearing a red dress. She said, this book was written just for me. I have 70,000 of those emails. From Brazil, I'm 27 years old. Please pardon my broken English. I'm 27, gay, and have AIDS, and for the first time understand the love of Jesus for me. Please, kiss in your heart, Mac. I don't begin to understand it. But I do understand that God is breathing a revelation of his character and nature that is a violation of the religious systems that we've tried to create. God won't stay in a box. Never has, never will. And the beautiful church who is made up of people who are the community of people, always people. This isn't a church. This is a parachurch building. When you leave tonight, the church will have left the building. It's you that matters. It's you that everything is about. You're the one that he left the 99 to go find. Because he loves you. It's you. Not a facade of you. Not you trying to be something else than who you really are. He has come to live inside of you. This great exchange. We get included into the love that exists between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And in exchange, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit come to live in our shacks, where he begins to heal us from the inside out. A process that he loves, because it's freeing us to be everything we were intended to be, united to everything God is. And each of us becomes this unique manifestation of the character and nature of God, the likes of which no one will see unless they look at you. You matter. To the praise of his glory, you matter. You matter. Amen? Amen. Thank you.
Yet another audience, Paula, represent the beneficiaries of your jester's riddle. For that, we thank you. To each and all, travel home this evening in safety and in hope of the unexpected, overwhelming love of God. Bless you.